What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stokastic Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Yes, Stokastic. Osmo is in the midst of a rebrand, but everything is the same tools, same personalities, same analysis. And today I am with Nick Lepri. We are breaking down the top 12 tight ends for fantasy football. The 4th of July is behind us. Fantasy football is heating up. Nick, how was your weekend and how are you doing today?
I am doing excellent today. I hope everyone in the comment section, everyone watching today's video, had an excellent 4th of July, just like I did. And I'm very excited to talk about some tight ends today. And after we get over 4th of July, this is really when people start to get really hyped about fantasy football. So it's going to be an exciting next 2 months.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And this is a hot position, one extremely important for fantasy football, of course. We've discussed it once before, so I'm really excited to hear what you have to say and the changes you've made in your rankings. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content is live. And for the purposes of this video, we will be using Underdog ADP. We'll talk a little bit about them later in the show. But if you've never heard of Underdog, they're the best place to play fantasy football in the summer, and that is why we use their ADP. All right, Nick, what do you say we get into this?
All right, let's do it.
All right, so at the top of the tight end position, I don't think there's going to be anything too crazy between mine and your rankings. Travis Kelce, he's the consensus number one between our rankings. Consensus, we just averaged my rankings with Nick's rankings, and this is pretty widely consensus across the industry. Travis Kelce, number one tight end. So let me just ask you this. Where are you comfortable drafting Travis Kelce? And then tell me a little bit about why he's the number one tight end.
Yeah, for me with Travis Kelce, I would want to be drafting him at the end of the first round. Last year, people got a little bit kind of happy, in my opinion, on drafting Travis Kelce, a little bit trigger happy, and they were drafting him sometimes a little too early, maybe in the middle of the first round. For me, he is a back end of the first round pick. So if you're in a 12-team league, at pick 9, 10, 11, or 12 is where I would be most comfortable taking Travis Kelce. And I think this year, unlike last year, there are going to be some leagues where Travis Kelce does get taken in the second round. The reason why he's my number one tight end is because of the consistency year in and year out that Travis Kelce puts out. Sure, he may not finish as the number one tight end on the season. I believe he will. But if he doesn't finish number one, I would be shocked if he finished outside the top 3. He was tight end number 2.5 PPR last year and tight end number 2.5 PPR points per game. Without Tyreek Hill, I believe that's going to help Travis Kelce out even more. He's going to be the clear number one target in this offense. He has that long-lasting connection with Patrick Mahomes. So Travis Kelce, to me, is kind of just a no-brainer tight end number one.
There's literally no holes you can poke in him outside of age. Maybe he's 33, but last year he was second in overall targets, 130. That was a 23% target share. He was 6th in yards per route run. So despite being 32 years old, he was still extremely efficient on the field in terms of those yards per route run again. And then you look at Kansas City, they're probably going to regress a little bit in terms of pass rate. Last year, they were 3rd in pass rate in neutral game scripts, but they were also 4th in plays per game. So even a little bit of regression here, I think, is going to be offset by removing Tyreek Hill from this offense. Again, Travis Kelce, 130 targets last year. Now you're removing Tyreek Hill. He should be up around 150, 160, I think, with ease. So as long as there's not a steep decline due to age, I think Travis Kelce, he's just your safest tight end here. After this, I think you can poke holes in every single tight end. Now, the degree to which those holes can be poked varies, but our tight end number 2 is Mark Andrews. Really, the only hole you can poke in him, in my opinion, is the offense. He's playing with Lamar Jackson, who's had streaky efficiency, we'll call it, still above average, but their pass rate is likely going to be near the bottom of the league. Now, they're extremely fast. They were 1st in plays per game. Last year, they were 23rd in neutral pass rate, but in previous years, that was closer to 30th, 31st. And based on the offseason moves the Ravens have made, I'm expecting it to trend back in that direction. With that said, Andrews is the bona fide wide receiver 1 on his team. Last year, he was 1st in targets, 153, and he was extremely efficient. He was 3rd in yards per route run at the tight end position. Do you think he's clearly behind Travis Kelce? I've seen him rising up draft boards on Underdog, and he's even surpassed Kelce in some drafts. So kind of talk to me about these two in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, they basically go within 3-4 picks of each other in a majority of drafts I've done on Underdog. I think in redraft leagues, it's going to be pretty clear that Mark Andrews is a 2nd-round pick and Travis Kelce is a 1st-round pick. But again, I don't think there's going to be this crazy 9-10 pick gap between the two like we could have seen in previous years. Mark Andrews, while you talked about how the quarterback play isn't the greatest, And, well, not necessarily that's not the greatest. It's just that Lamar isn't super efficient and that they do like to run the ball. When it comes to tight ends in the NFL, to me, there are only two in the NFL that are the clear number one targets on their team, and that is these two, Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. So I think Andrews is going to be just fine. He saw 9.1 targets per game last season, which was higher than Travis Kelce's 8.4. Now, I understand that Mark Andrews was playing with different quarterbacks last year because Lamar Jackson ended up getting hurt. But at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson is the superior quarterback compared to Tyler Huntley and the other quarterbacks they had play last season. So I'm very confident in Andrews and could see him putting up similar numbers last year, over 1,300 yards, maybe 8, 9, 10 touchdowns. I think Mark Andrews has the upside to be the number one tight end in fantasy, but I just think the safety with Travis Kelce is what really elevates him for me to be the number one guy.
I agree with you, and ADP seems to agree with you as well. Kelce coming off the board, ADP of 12.1 on underdog. Andrews is at 18.6. But to your point, I am still very much comfortable taking Andrews in that range if that's the way the draft falls. I do think there is a tier break after this. Not a massive tier break, but I think you are foregoing some safety if you leave without Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. And that brings us to our tight end 3. It's Darren Waller. Now, the holes you can poke in Waller's game, there's a little more of them. I think it mainly comes down to competition in the offense. Waller's now battling not only Renfrow, but he's battling an incoming Davante Adams into the offense. Not to mention the efficiency at quarterback for this Raiders team has been middling to above average with Derek Carr. We'll put it firmly in that middling category. But Waller's been extremely efficient when he's on the field. 1.7 yards per route run, was 7th in the NFL last year. He only had 93 targets. That was largely due to injury. Nothing that had to do with Waller's efficiency himself. And last year, the Raiders were extremely pass heavy. They were 7th in pass rated neutral game scripts. With McDaniels coming in, I'm expecting this to drop a little bit. We've seen him in the Patriots scheme use the tight end a lot, but they've also been run heavy. So I'm expecting a little bit of a regression in terms of pass rate. But I do think Waller, as efficient as he is, still deserves to be a top 5 tight end. Where you want to rank him in this group, I think, is up for debate. For me, he's actually tight end 4. But talk to me about Darren Waller.
Yeah, he is my tight end number 3, but between tight ends 3 and number 4, who we're about to talk about in a couple of minutes, to me, it is very close. It is splitting hairs, and basically the argument is going to be made on the efficiency of the player or just straight up target volume is what I think the argument you would make for the 4th player. So with me, I like Darren Waller a ton. I think the addition of Davante Adams will actually help out Darren Waller, who was the tight end number 6 in points per game last year, tied with TJ Hockenson. Now, I don't expect him to get 8.5 targets per game like he did last season. I think that is going to go down. But at the end of the day, I think the fact that Davante Adams is there is going to drastically open up the amount of opportunities Darren Waller can get, because it's impossible for you to put double coverage on Waller, on Renfrow, and Davante Adams at the exact same time. And I think Darren Waller is going to be kind of underlooked by the defense. So I expect Darren Waller to have a great season. Again, I don't expect his target numbers to be something ridiculous, but he only scored 2 touchdowns last year. That is bound to increase. And I think he's going to put up a pretty solid year again. Between tight end 3 and number 4, I think there's definitely debate on where you want to put Waller.
Yeah, with our tight end 4, it's Kyle Pitts. I think the volume's going to be better for Pitts. He's at worst the wide receiver 2 on his team. He's competing with just rookie Drake London, who's coming off a severe injury, whereas Waller's competing with Adams and Hunter Renfrow. Efficiency of the offense, I'm not sure it's going to matter that much. Darren Waller already played in a middling efficiency offense. Kyle Pitts played in a below average efficiency offense, but he was still 4th in yards per route run. His yards per route run was better than Darren Waller's. And he's a guy that's also bound for a touchdown regression. You talk about Waller scoring 2, Kyle Pitts only scored 1. That's also likely to increase. Even if Atlanta's bad, you just rarely see tight ends with this target volume score 1 touchdown. You look at the Atlanta offense, again, not expecting it to be efficient, but they lost 287 targets. 42 of those came at the tight end position. They were 12th in pass rated neutral game scripts, and they're not in neutral game scripts a lot. They're going to be trailing a ton, which is only going to benefit Pitts. Their plays per game 31st. I'm not sure that increases. We'll see. They're going to be a bad team is what I think. The main argument against Pitts is he's just on a bad team with bad quarterbacks. Volume's there, generational talent. It's just, can the volume propel him ahead of Waller if the quarterback play is so bad? So I'll let you talk about Pitts. What do you think?
Yeah, the funniest thing about Pitts is that aside from the Pro Bowl, he still hasn't even scored a touchdown in the United States. His only touchdown was in that England game, which is pretty funny. So Kyle Pitts is probably one of the most talented tight ends in the NFL. There is an argument to make that Matt Ryan is probably significantly better than Marcus Mariota. But hey, again, the argument you made makes complete sense, right? Kyle Pitts is probably the number one target on his team. You can make the argument with Drake London, blah, blah, blah. They're the 1A, the 1B in this offense. The offense is going to probably be bad. The team's going to be bad, so they're going to be throwing a lot late in the games, I should say. He had 110 targets last year, 6.5 per game. I think that is going to increase. I just think Kyle Pitts is very safe because of the volume. He may not score 10 potential touchdowns like I think Darren Waller could, but he's just a very safe option because of the volume. So I understand why you have Kyle Pitts ranked ahead of Darren Waller. And again, I don't think there's really a humongous argument to be made here between the two.
Yeah, Pitts basically plays receiver. He never lines up in line. Waller, he's not really a inline tight end himself. He mostly plays in the slot. But let's go to tight end 5. I think he is still in this tier, maybe a slight step below. If you really had Kittle ranked anywhere from tight end 3 to 5, I wouldn't have too many qualms with it. With Kittle, it comes down to he's on a run-centric offense. Last year, they were 27th in pass rate and neutral game scripts. They're a very slow offense, methodical offense. They were 28th in plays per game. They win through efficiency, but he has a lot of competition in the offense. He's going to have Deebo Samuel. He's going to have Brandon Ayuk, presumably, as long as he's not in the doghouse. But then he might also be changing quarterbacks, and I'm not sure this helps him. If anything, think it hurts his volume. Moving from Garoppolo, who's essentially a statue in the pocket, limited to just his pocket passing, versus Trey Lance, who does have dynamic mobility on the ground. That could reduce Kittle's volume. Now, Kittle's volume last year, 94 targets. Again, he's a guy that gets hurt a lot, so you have to look at his targets on a per-game basis. He actually had a 23% target share, which is solid. It's just with Kittle, he's going to have to win through efficiency. He was number 2 in yards per route run last year at the tight end position. No surprise to anyone, he's done this throughout his career. It's always come down to injuries and volume, and now we might be moving to Trey Lance, which just gives a few more concerns here. What do you think of Kittle?
Yeah, George Kittle, if we're trying to rank like the best tight ends in terms of how good they actually are at blocking, pass catching, all of that together, if you got points for blocking in fantasy football, then George Kittle would be amazing, right? George Kittle is great at blocking, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really help us out too much in fantasy. Sure, it does keep him on the field, but like you said, without Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm pretty sure Jimmy Garoppolo has one of those tattoos that says, I love George Kittle on it, because he just throws the ball to George Kittle every 5 seconds. George Kittle is very safe with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think going to Trey Lance is going to hurt Jimmy Garoppolo, or not going to hurt Jimmy Garoppolo. It is going to hurt Jimmy Garoppolo because he's not going to fucking play, right? His feelings might get hurt, but it's going to hurt George Kittle as well. I think George Kittle's going to be just fine. I think ranking him to the top 5 makes sense. I'm just not super bullish on George Kittle, and I really haven't been throughout his career.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we discussed all the negatives. He's an elite player. It's just he's never going to be targeted like Travis Kelce. But that also is reflected in ADP. George Kittle, you can get a pick 50.5 on Underdog right now, whereas you have to spend the number 12 pick on Kelce. So I think that is reflected in ADP. But you can also save a little bit if you go to our tight end 6, who is Dalton Schultz. It's exactly the same on Underdog. He's the tight end 6 there. His ADP is 67.1. So you're saving about 17 picks here if you forego Kittle and go to Schultz. And I don't think that's crazy personally. When you look at Schultz as a player, he was fairly efficient. He was 8th in the NFL in yards per route run at the tight end position. That was a little better than I honestly remembered. And he plays in a voluminous offense that's losing a lot of targets. So last year, they were 6th in pass rate and neutral game scripts. That's kind of been a staple of Dallas. And they're extremely fast. They were 2nd in plays per game. They're losing 205 targets, most of those coming via Amari Cooper. But if anything, that should keep Schultz on the field in a more prominent role than what we saw last year. He'll be competing with just CeeDee Lamb and then Michael Gallup once he gets healthy. Again, we've talked about this a lot in previous videos. We don't know when Gallup's going to play. So there's a chance Schultz opens the year as the de facto option 2 in this pass game. And if he's going to be as efficient and Dak hopefully playing at a better level than last year, it's really hard to rank him lower than tight end 6. So I'm very comfortable with this. ADP is 67 is fine with me. What do you think?
Yeah, Dalton Schultz last year was a top 5 tight end. He was tight end number 3.5 PPR, tight end 5 in points per game. He was tight end 6 in targets, 3rd in receptions, 6th in receiving yards, and 5th in touchdowns. Like you said, the biggest argument for Dalton Schultz is that Amari Cooper is now gone. Michael Gallup is banged up and could miss maybe half of the season. Now, there are very much conflicting reports coming out. Some people will say, oh, he's going to be fine. In September, he's going to be good to go, which is what I read recently. And then there's other reports that this guy's going to miss like half the fucking season. So as we get closer to August, I think we're going to have a much clearer picture on Michael Gallup. But here with Dalton Schultz, like you said, as long as Dak Prescott is able to be consistent, because I've talked about this a bunch. Dak Prescott at points of last season, the season opens up against Tampa Bay. This guy literally looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And then the very next week, he looks like he has no idea what he's doing. So I hope that Dak Prescott is able to stay consistent. And if he does, that could really elevate Dalton Schultz to finish again as a top 3 tight end. I think we could see Schultz elevate himself past guys like Waller, Pitts, and Kittle. I would be shocked, though, if Dalton Schultz finished as the number 1 tight end, assuming there are no injuries to Kelce and Andrews.
Yeah, I think Dak will be fine. Career high completion percentage last year. Yards per attempt also above average. The inconsistency, I think, early in the year, I mean, he's coming off of basically a season-ending injury. He only played 5 games in 2020, and last year he did suffer an injury in the middle of the season himself. So expecting Dak to be fine as long as he isn't hurt. But let's talk about Underdog Fantasy. We've referenced them many times already in this show. They're the best place to play fantasy football in the summer. They unveiled Best Ball Mania 3 earlier this offseason, which is a tournament that has $10 million in total prizes. And all you have to do is draft your team. That's it. There's no in-season management, no waivers, no trades. Underdog gives you your best score every single week of the year, and then the highest score at the end of the year wins. Last year's Best Ball Mania championship team was drafted in June, so there's no time to wait. We just crossed into July. Make sure you get these drafts done. And better yet, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100 when you sign up with the promo code AWESEMO. That's good for 4 entries into the Best Ball Mania 3. All you have to do is head to UnderdogFantasy.com, the App Store, or even click the link in the video description below and then sign up with the promo code AWESEMO to take advantage of those free $100. All right, getting the tight end 7. This is where things get a little bit more dicey. We can start poking more holes in these players. And Dallas Goedert is our tight end 7. He plays on a run-heavy Philadelphia Eagles team. Last year, they were 31st in neutral pass rate. They were 16th in plays per game, so middling there. And now you're adding A.J. Brown to the equation. So this is quickly becoming a crowded situation with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, whoever they play as their wide receiver 3, Rager, Quez Watkins, doesn't matter. They're going to command some targets. Last year, Dallas Goedert was the most efficient tight end in fantasy football. He was first in yards per route run, but he only saw 76 targets, 18.7% target share. That might not increase at all, which is a problem for me. And lately, I've been debating moving Hockenson ahead of him. We'll talk about him a little bit here, but ultimately, Goedert I still think is safe. But to me, the upside is capped, which is why he is firmly below Schultz in the former group as the tight end 7 for me.
I agree. I think the addition of A.J. Brown definitely is going to hurt Dallas Goedert a ton. Like you said, the only reason why he was so good last year was because of efficiency, 17th in targets, 14th in reception, but somehow finishes as 5th in receiving yards because of how efficient he was, and he was 12th in terms of touchdowns. I think Jalen Hurts is a pretty solid quarterback, so I'm not too worried about the quarterback play, and I think they could potentially be slightly more pass-heavy now that they bring in A.J. Brown, and maybe this does open up in the red zone for Dallas Goedert to get a little bit more opportunities because now, you have to cover that behemoth of a man, A.J. Brown. At the end of the day, just like what you said, Dallas Goedert is pretty clearly outside of the top 6 for me, and he just doesn't really have that similar top 5 upside as the guys ahead of him do. But I still believe, like you said, he's very safe, and I'd be perfectly fine leaving the draft with Dallas Goedert, even if there are going to be some down weeks where he isn't as efficient. I think he is pretty safe, and again, I think that having a guy that Jalen Hurts really trusts is very key for Dallas Goedert. So I like him here again this year. I was very confident in him last year. I'll ride with him again.
Yeah, we have him slightly above ADP. He's tight end 8 on Underdog, ADP of 97.2. So he definitely isn't expensive, but the player that comes just ahead of him is TJ Hockenson, tight end 7, ADP of 85. I've been debating making this switch. Ultimately, it was the efficiency propping Goedert up for me. But it's not like Hockenson hasn't been efficient. He was 10th in yards per route run. Detroit's pass rate at neutral game scripts was 28th. This is a concern for me because if they're better, I think they run the ball a lot more. Last year, just to look at this discrepancy, this is crazy. They were 12th in pass rate overall because they were getting crushed in their games, but they were 28th in pass rate at neutral game scripts. That's a pretty good indication that this team wants to run the ball. They were just so bad they couldn't do it. Now they've taken a significant step forward this offseason with some additions. They made excellent offensive line, improved on defense, add Jameson Williams. We need to talk about him with Hockenson because he's probably going to miss at least 3-4 games, maybe even half the year, which could put Hockenson in a better position to see targets. But ultimately, the reason I had Dallas Goedert ahead of him is because Hockenson has the same concerns. He's in a less efficient offense. And I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, DJ Chark, DeAndre Swift. When everyone's healthy, there's a lot of competition here. Same to Goedert. It's just Hockenson might have a better opportunity early in the year due to injuries. What do you think of Hockenson?
Yeah, I like Hockenson a decent amount. I do have him lower than tight end number 8. I believe I have him ranked as my tight end number 9. And we're probably going to have a big argument about the player that I've ranked ahead of him because I don't think you like him as much as I do. But when it comes to TJ Hockenson in Detroit, obviously, you're not going to have wet dreams thinking about Jared Goff throwing the ball to TJ Hockenson. But to me, I'm pretty confident with TJ Hockenson as a player. He did finish as tight end 15 last year, but that was because of injuries, only playing in 12 games. Was the tight end 6.5 PPR points per game, tied with Darren Waller, who's our tight end number 3. So when it comes to TJ Hockenson, I think he's going to be pretty consistent yet again. Nothing super crazy. Again, with these guys, I really just don't see them finishing inside the top 5. The only guy outside top 5 I could see doing that is Dalton Schultz. I'm just not overwhelmingly excited about these guys. I think they're pretty safe. And I think the longer you wait in the draft, the less of a chance it is that you really get that top 5 guy.
I don't think there's too much of a difference in like top 5 equity between like a Goddard and like our tight end 10. We'll get there in a little bit, but ultimately I do agree with you. I think once you get outside that top 6, there is a significant drop off unless like injuries happen. That's always the crazy variable here. Kittle's been hurt a lot. Waller's been hurt a lot. If these guys get injured, that's where I think you could get some equity in some top 5s,
Yeah.
but probably not going to happen to all of these players, but we'll see. That'll be determined later in the year. Tight end 9 for us is Zach Ertz. And you might be wondering why he's ahead of Knox. Don't worry, he'll be coming up next year. But Ertz, he's another one of these players I view as being very safe, playing for Arizona. He was tied for 3rd in targets at the tight end position last year. He had a 19% target share. This Cardinals team has DeAndre Hopkins suspended. They were 14th in passer to neutral game scripts. They were 8th in plays per game. So no, they're not the Buffalo Bills, but they are still above average in terms of pass rate and plays per game. And Ertz was still fairly efficient despite aging, 13th in yards per route run. To me, there's just not very much competition for him, and he got paid, which is a reflection of the offensive philosophy here. He should be on the field for most of the snaps, if not all, because of his ability to flex in and out of the slot. What do you think of Ertz?
Yeah, I like Zach Ertz a ton as well. And there's not too much of a difference between all of these guys for me. Zach Ertz, obviously, they did end up drafting a new tight end to the team whose name is escaping me. It's Trey McBride. And I don't think that typically most first year tight ends don't really do anything. Typically, the tight end position is one of the hardest kind of skill gaps to grasp going into the NFL. So I'd be really shocked if he had a pretty solid role in this offense, at least early on in his career. Maybe in a couple of years, he ends up being this fantastic player. But right now, I think that Zach Ertz is the clear number 1 tight end on this roster. And with Christian Kirk out, like Christian Kirk's in Jacksonville, now they don't have DeAndre Hopkins for the first couple of weeks, like you were saying. It seems like Zach Ertz is pretty clearly the number 2 target on this team behind Mr. Hollywood Brown, who they just traded for. Zach Ertz was on the team last year, and he was not necessarily this crazy efficient player, but he was seeing a lot of volume, 3rd in targets, 4th in receptions, 9th in receiving yards, and 9th in touchdowns. I just think it's really safe to draft Zach Ertz. I don't think he's going to be a top 5 guy. Again, he did finish top 5 last year, tied with Rob Gronkowski, so it's definitely possible, but just not a guy I am crazy about. Again, most of these guys I'm not super crazy about outside top 5.
Yeah, I like Ertz where he's going a little bit more. You look at his ADP. He's a player that isn't getting a ton of love. He's tight end 10 on
Yeah.
underdog, 109.3. So if you just factor in ADP like a Hockenson, a Goddard, I would rather just save the 20 to 30 picks, depending on which guy you're looking at, and go with Ertz. And I think you could say the same thing about the next player, Dawson Knox. There's some concerns with him that aren't typically being priced in here, in my opinion. His ADP has fallen a little bit. He's now at 102, so he's getting a little more palatable, in my opinion. He wasn't a player I was too excited on heading into the season because they spent significant capital this offseason on OJ Howard, a player who had better draft capital than him, who's been more efficient than him. To me, with Knox, he has not been efficient in his career, and I shouldn't even say to me, it's just a flat out fact. You look at his yards per route run last year, it was poor. He was at 17th, 1.2 yards per route run, but he plays in an explosive offense led by Josh Allen. 2 positives for him. 1, the offense as a whole. 2nd, in neutral game pass rate. And then overall 6th in plays per game. but Knox's efficiency has ticked up. So while he's been bad from an efficiency perspective, and last year he wasn't good either, it has gotten better. So he's a player that kind of needed work coming out of the NFL draft. He could take another step forward in terms of efficiency. We see this with tight ends all the time. But to me, early in his career, we saw them use a timeshare. They bring in OJ Howard with pretty significant money. To me, it suggests there could be a share again this year. I'm still willing to take Knox as a top 10 tight end and actually just move them up in my rankings. You convinced me a little bit on the last video. So I think at his ADP, he is fine because of the attachment to Buffalo. You just want pieces of that offense ultimately. And I'm going to take shots on the Buffalo offense regardless. Talk to me about Knox.
Yeah, so I like Dawson Knox a lot. He is probably one of my favorite kind of deeper targets at the tight end position because I really don't see OJ Howard being very involved. Now, Dawson Knox early on in his career, like you said, he was basically a nobody. No one saw, in my opinion, I don't know a single soul who last year thought Dawson Knox was going to finish as well as he did. It basically seemed like they were going to run tight end by committee there. There's going to be a million tight ends. And then you didn't even need to own any of them. Even in like a best ball league, you draft Dawson Knox and he has like 2 usable games. Whereas last year, the guy was fucking amazing. So I think in 2022, we see Dawson Knox take yet another step up. There are going to be games, of course, where OJ Howard scores instead of Dawson Knox. And maybe you break your television or something because that's frustrating. But at the end of the day, there are a couple other teams where that's going to happen to you as well. I think Dawson Knox is going to continue to get better. And when you can draft the tight end that is used a decent amount on one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the NFL with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, to me, it just makes a lot of sense. He did score 9 total touchdowns last year, second at tight end. So maybe that goes down, but I wouldn't even project him to have like some crazy fall off because of the fact that he is on the Buffalo Bills and they are just such a great offense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do think bringing in OJ Howard matters. The guy's getting $3 million for 1 year. It's definitely not insignificant. He's not getting paid to start, but he's getting paid to play a role. So that needs to be factored in. You don't just pay guys to not use them. So to me, at least a concern with Knox. He's still a top 10 tight end for me. So not too much to see there. Our tight end 11, he is way up my board. He's actually the 11th tight end for me is Robert Tonyan of Green Bay. With Tonyan, it comes down to injuries, and we've gotten nothing but positive reports for him this offseason. Last week, there were reports that he's already sprinting on track for week 1. Boom, that's the news I need to put him in the top 12 tight ends for me, and it is nothing more. When you look at him on the field, he's been efficient, and now he plays in a Green Bay offense that has a ton of vacated targets from Davante Adams. It all just lines up at this point. He's a player that should be ascending up draft boards the offseason as positive news continues to trickle in. Without a setback, firmly a top 12 tight end for me. What do you think?
Yeah, now I have Tonyan ranked lower, and I have been continuing to move him up as the positive news keeps coming out. Tonyan is one of my highest owned tight ends in all of best ball. I understand this is the fantasy football channel, but I'm doing drafts in best ball, and Robert Tonyan is getting drafted at a point where it basically makes no fucking sense, like how you can get a guy that could be the number 1 red zone target on his team, probably will be the number 1 red zone target on his team, and is a guy that has been with Aaron Rodgers for the last couple of years, and I understand last year he got hurt, but the year prior, this guy was a touchdown monster. I don't understand why Robert Tonyan's getting drafted so deep. I guess it is because of the injury, but I could easily see him finishing as a top 10 tight end again. And again, when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers as the quarterback and the wide receiver room is a bit confusing, it's kind of similar to Travis Kelce, right? Who is the number 1 receiver in Kansas City? I'm not too sure. Same thing with Green Bay, but I do know that Robert Tonyan and Aaron Rodgers have a great connection. I do know that Aaron Rodgers likes throwing the ball to the tight end, so I'm very comfortable when it comes to drafting Robert Tonyan, especially where he's going right now. But like you said, his ADP is going to keep on moving up.
Yeah, this is a forward-thinking ranking. You look at his ADP and underdog, he's tight end 15. 143.3 is the overall ADP, which has continued to rise. People sometimes don't pay attention to the news as closely, and you generally see ADP lag. As this becomes a little more mainstream through the months of July and into August, Tonyan probably gets a little closer to that tight end 12 marker. But let's go to tight end 12. It is Hunter Henry, largely driven by you. He's still much lower in my rankings, and that's just because there's a lot of concerns in the offense still. It's going to be run heavy. We've seen it be run heavy the last few years. We've seen it be a tight end split at times. Jonnu Smith is still there, battled a little bit of injuries last year. So I don't think Henry's out of the woods for being in the timeshare yet. He did significantly outperform Jonnu, and that's what he has going for him most. But overall, run-heavy offense, he's going to have to win through efficiency and through touchdowns. To me, I'd rather take shots on like Irv Smith and Freiermuth and Higbee and some other guys that I view having more upside and more secure roles. But you're really bullish on Hunter Henry, so I will give you the floor.
Yeah, so when it comes to Hunter Henry, it has nothing to do with the volume for me. It's all about the efficiency, right? He only finishes 18th in targets, 17th in receptions, 13th in receiving yards, but he was number 2 in terms of touchdowns. Hunter Henry is going to be a touchdown or bust type of tight end, but I do believe that the team is going to give Mac Jones a little bit more opportunity to throw the ball. I understand they're not going to be like a top 10 passing offense in the NFL, but I still do believe that Mac Jones is going to be given a little bit more of an opportunity, maybe take a bit of the bubble wrap off of him, take the handcuffs off a little bit, and let him cook a little bit more. I think Hunter Henry is the clear number 1 tight end there. I'm not worried at all about Jonnu Smith. I think if Jonnu Smith was going to be the guy, he would have shown that last year. We've seen years of people talk up Jonnu Smith and years of Jonnu Smith kind of fall flat on his fucking face. So I'm very confident when it comes to Hunter Henry. I think he is the number 1 tight end there. And again, you are really hoping for the touchdowns because it's going to be touchdown or bust, which is why I have him ranked closer to 12 than I do to 10, because he was tight end 9 last year in half PPR, tight end 12 and half PPR points per game. So in my opinion, he could certainly finish as a top 12 tight end, but I understand the argument you might want to make about Pat Fryermuth or some of these other guys who are going to be seeing a lot more volume inside of their respective offenses.
Yeah, for me, volume is going to trump all. It's just if
Yeah.
you get the targets, you're more likely to finish ahead of them. So, and the thing is with both Tonyan and Henry right now, you don't need to draft them this high. Again, Tonyan for me is a forward-thinking ADP ranking. Henry for you, you're betting on the efficiency, but their
Yeah.
respective ADPs are 143 and 150. So you don't need to draft them this highly. And I honestly wouldn't recommend it. I would try to wait and get some better value at other positions and then take the security later with these tight ends. But anything else to add on the position?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Don't just draft these guys where we have them ranked, right? Just go ahead and wait on the value. You don't have to draft Robert Tonyan the second someone takes Dawson Knox because there's probably going to be 40 or 50 picks in between where you can get those guys. So make sure you guys understand that as well. I think that's kind of a no brainer, but you never know.
Yeah, for sure. Just want to be a little practical with the rankings, but let us know who you think should be a top 12 tight end. What do you think of our rankings in particular? And if there's anybody we missed, hit the thumbs up button on the way out. You can follow Nick on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. It is on the screen in front of you. I am on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be with you all summer, so make sure to tune in to more videos. We'll see you again next time.